Welcome to Insurance Icons, where we have the biggest and best influential people in the entire insurance industry coming on and sharing all the best insights on the stories that got them to where they're at and some of the little nuggets that can help you maybe get there one day too. Today, we have my very own, a very special guest, my very own mentor, Michael Vasu. This man, I met him a long time ago in the Fontainebleau lobby, and he told me something that was, very impactful for a young guy kind of just getting in this industry. And he said, insurance sales it's a different sale because it's more of a emotional sale, right? And he kind of, coming at from a salesman that was, so not used to hearing something like that, and kind of seeing how how different the deal was. It was something that really helped open my eyes on what kind of deal this really is. So with that, welcome, Mike. It's a pleasure to have you on Insurance Icons today.
Thanks, Pete. It's a pleasure to be on. I'm excited. I don't know if you got the right guest. You call it Insurance Icons. I'm not sure if I'm an icon, not yet, but I'm working on it.
Mike, that's, it's funny you say that, but I think so many people would disagree with you because I think, what I try to do is I try to find, whenever I bring an icon in this industry onto the show to share with my incredible audience, one thing that I always want to do is really find out, what are they an icon of? So, from my research, and all the stories I've heard from you over the years, something that everyone always talks about is the incredible amount of professionalism that you bring to everything you do, almost militant style, right? And I know personally that from my, own biased opinion, that I think it comes a lot from your parents, right? But it has obviously a lot to come from a lot of your mentors as well. So with that, one of the things that I think that is most prevalent from that extreme professionalism is your systems, and more, even a little bit more specific on that is like how you do these, how you organize these systems with like spreadsheets and things like that. People used to tell me that you would come to conventions and things like 10, 15 years ago, and you would have all of your spreadsheets on like hard drives, little mini hard drives, and you would give them to people, just so giving. One of the seven, what is it, the seven, it's not the seven deadly sins. I've been reading about this. It's the seven, like the good things, right?
The habits of highly effective people, or the seven fruits of the spirit. Is that what you're talking about?
I think so. It's like charity is one of them, purity is one of them. It's like the seven deadly sins, and then it's like the seven things or whatever.
Fruits of the spirit, yeah.
And when I was hearing about that, I was like, oh my man, I need to be more, I need to start practicing more of these. And just makes me think about that. So with that, what do you think your superpower would be in this industry, and where do you think you got it from?
I'm not sure that I have, a superpower, but if anything, I think it's probably the gift of discernment of who to listen to. We all have so many people to be thankful to for the success we have in our lives. And I think I'm aware of that every single day, whether it was, the many sacrifices that my parents made as I was growing up, whether it's the gift of learning that I got from so many of my teachers, whether it was the experience, the friendships, the bonds that I created when I was in college and graduate school, or whether it was at American Income. If I think about it, it was really the people along the way more than anything else that made a huge impact on me. And so over time, you kind of learn who to hitch your wagon to and what kind of a circle to keep. They say if you hang out with 5 successful people, you'll be the 6th. If you hang out with 5 broke people, you'll be the 6th. If you hang out with 5 wealthy people, you'll be the 6th. And so I
hang out with you.
Yeah, I think just, probably identifying people's gifting and their character, and being able to extract from them the things that I need in order to become the best version of myself, so that I can share that version of myself with the world.
That's awesome, brother. So, but what do you think, like more specifically, like the spreadsheets in the organization, like have you always been that organized? Like, when you were growing up in like middle school, did your like those protractors you used to have, was your protractor like color coordinated, and like, what did it have, like the fanciest handwriting? Like, was your mom like whipping you with the fly swatter if your cursive was messed up? You know what I mean? Like, where did this extreme organization and just like, I model myself trying to be like, all right, this is Vasu. He's perfect. How could I be more like that? You know what I mean? He's super organized, blah, 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 blah. So how did your stuff get to that? Like, tell me a little bit more about that.
At the end of the day, the only way that you can grow a large business is that you have to be motivated to be a little bit lazy. And, I want to give some context to that, is that the more energy you're spending trying to find things, the more energy you're spending trying to calculate things, the more energy you're spending trying to organize things that you could do just one time, do it right, and have it forever. The more time and the more energy that you waste, that you take away from being able to coach, develop, lead people. That's a full-time job. So, for me, it was out of necessity, out of understanding that I had a vision for what I was wanting to create, what I was trying to do in my life and in my career, and that I had to be organized in order to do that. It's very difficult to have a conversation with somebody about them getting better when we're dealing with feelings. It's very difficult to manage fiction. And so in order to lead people, to manage people, to lead people, you need to have facts. And so you need to be organized with those facts. And that helps you make better decisions so that you reduce the risk of problems happening. I'm a big believer in systems because humans have personalities. Humans have deficiencies. For a human being, 2 + 2 could equal 5. But in a system, it can't. It has to equal 4. And so by removing the negatives of the human element and replacing those with a systematic element, it allows us to focus on the development of the good traits and qualities that people bring to the table as far as being human beings. And that's my favorite part of the job. The systems and all that stuff, that's the necessary part that allows the engine to go, but it's not the soul of the business. The soul of the business would be the people. And so it's just a way for me to be able to spend more of my time with people, and that's what I love to do.
You made a comment. You're like, you thought it was weird. We were talking about administrative stuff, but did you know that my mentor, Mike Vasu, once told me, I asked him, what's the number one thing you look for in a leader? And you know what he told me? Administrative excellence.
Why? Do you remember why?
I remember why. You told me this. You said, I want to find someone that can do the easy things right. As long as they can do the easy things right all the time, then the hard things, I don't remember what the part was about the hard things.
Well, if you can control the controllables, then I know that, if I'm pouring time into someone, if I'm mentoring somebody, if I'm giving somebody advice, the genius is, I was taught this years ago, is not in knowledge. Anybody can have knowledge. But what Jim Surace, who is my mentor, one of my mentors, told me, Jim said, the genius is in implementation. And so we don't have an education problem nowadays or in this world. Our problem is a lack of application from people.
One time I heard, I don't know who told me this exactly, but somebody told me that like most of the company uses your systems from when you had like all those spreadsheets and you would give out all those cards. Like, and I think when they talk about systems, I think they're talking about like certain systems, maybe like the war reports or stuff like that. So what do you think about the truth on that? You think like a lot of that, there's still a lot of systems out there that people are using that you made from decades ago, or what's the validity to that? Or
well, I think that, whenever I see a problem and I can think that we can create a process, I try to do that, because you create the process one time and then it just becomes the way that you kind of do things. And so, is there some truth to the fact that some of the systems that were developed almost 20 years ago and in the period of time when I was building my organization from the ground level, is there some truth that those systems still exist today? Yeah, probably, but they're all really a reflection of a foundation of the systems that existed before. But I tend to be a little bit of an engineer, I'm not an engineer by trade, but if you tell me, if you want to motivate me to come up with something better, just tell me this is the best way to do something. And what I'll do is I'll use that way, and then I'm going to try to find ways to improve it, because I'm a big believer in the Japanese concept of Kaizen, Kaizen. And Kaizen is the commitment, the long-term commitment to perpetual improvement, to constantly doing better. So taking an approach, finding a way to improve it, applying it, evaluating it, and then making additional adjustments and doing this over and over and over again. And when will it be enough? Never. It'll never be enough. As long as I'm in the game, we're going to constantly look for ways that we can improve and get better off of the foundational systems that have existed and been proven to work for years.
Mike, as I kind of think of how much, where can I bring value to my audience? How can I make their lives better, especially in this industry, that one of the, most lucrative industries I've ever seen, right?
Yep.
I have my little brother in it. So with that, I think that if we could spend this podcast maybe just talking about, more of your career, and then maybe, because there's so much of, my mentor I want to share with the audience, because it's not just, insurance, and it's not just business. There's, it's, from your mind to, how you handle your body and your health to your family. So I think those could be things maybe we do for part 2, but I think for right now, so my next question would be this: what systems in particularly, like maybe like the war report, like, where you could track people's performances, or was it like, what parts do you think that you brought to this deal to kind of change it? What things did you see that were already like really good? This is how things were being done, and this is how I'm going to bring further excitement to my team. Maybe when you were like an RGA or a middle manager, that really started showing people like, wow, Mike sees this deal in a little different of a light. Like he could take it and he can analyze it and put it into spreadsheets and figure out different variables that we can improve. So what were some of those?
I think it's just kind of connecting, data doesn't really do anything for you. And sometimes data can be limiting to people. In other words, if you look at the data and you resign yourself to say, well, this is what we've always been and that what we're always going to be, then I think you have a lot of limitations, and I think you remove a lot of the excitement from the business. But I guess, I can't probably identify something specific. You would have to ask other people that question. But in terms of the way that I looked at the business, first of all, I think we look at business. I think we look at sales. I think we look at the insurance industry overall, and we kind of say to ourselves, well, it's going to just be, high turnover. And one of my superpowers, when I was building my organization, was that we had an excellent retention of agents. And so identifying what are the things that allow you to do that, and systems, reports, they allow you to do that because it removes the element where it becomes my opinion or where it becomes my feeling about things, and it focuses you on facts. See, if you give me the facts, then I know how to troubleshoot something. I know what to do. I know where we can develop somebody a little bit better. And it's all in diving in and finding the truth. And so everything that I've ever done has always been to try to equip people and to put them in a position where they could be successful and build a career for the long term. I think too many people go into careers, life, marriages with a I'll try this out type of an attitude. And that's almost certainly an attitude that's going to lead to failure. And so, I just kind of switching that up and making the focus more about the long term and trying to retain agents instead of replace agents and grow agents and develop agents. I didn't look at this as a revolving door, like a lot of people in the industry do. I looked at it that there were definite ways that made an influence and an impact on people to get them to improve and increase their chances of success in the long term.
With that, it wouldn't be a great introduction to you, Mike, without us talking a little bit about your parents and the original story of them coming over to this country, as it's such a big part of your message. So I think, to encompass that, let's go all the way back and kind of bring us to your early life a little bit, from, your parents come to this country and your guys' development into in young adults.
Well, when my dad was growing up in Eastern Europe, it was a country that at that time was going through a communist revolution, and Nicolae Ceausescu had been coming to power in Romania at that time in the 60s. My dad was born in the late 50s. And, he just sat there and he looked around and he thought to himself, as a child, maybe 10 years old, he thought, I don't think I want to live here. I want to go to America. And so it's so interesting how the seeds that we plant in our minds, even at a young age, can grow and can become reality. They can become manifest in our lives. And so my dad would watch, Elvis Presley on TV, and he would stay up and, watch Muhammad Ali fights. And he would have these dreams of being in the United States. And so in the late 70s, in 1978, he decided to drop out of college. And he's an only child. And my grandparents were not, too thrilled about that decision. But he decided to drop out of college and he decided to move to the United States. And he did. He came to the United States with, $50 in his pocket, a suitcase, and a dream. He didn't speak the language. He didn't have a job. He didn't have a degree. He really didn't have a game plan. What he knew was that this was the land of opportunity. And that's all he wanted. He didn't need anybody to do anything for him. He wanted to do something for himself. But if he was going to do something for himself, he wanted it to be in the greatest country on earth. And so that's why he came to the United States. He started working within the first week of being here. Within a couple of weeks, he had a car and he started to build his life. Now, at this time, he was a single person. But in 1980, he went back to Romania and he went to go visit for about a month. And in that trip, maybe a week or so into that trip, he met my mom. And so they spent some time together. And after about 3 weeks, he told her, he said, I'm going to be back next year and I'm going to marry you. And I don't know how seriously my mom took that. Sometimes guys will say whatever. And I think there was a part of my mom that kind of thought that, but sure enough, my dad, even though he was making maybe 100 and something bucks a week at that time, took every extra dollar he had and he invested it in long distance phone calls to my mom. And a year later, he went back and sure enough, he married her. And so this was 1981, August of 1981. In fact, they just celebrated their anniversary yesterday. And they got married and they got pregnant right away. And of course, my mom couldn't come back right away because her immigration situation wasn't figured out yet. So my dad came back because he had to go back to work and they were pregnant with me immediately. Well, in March of 1982, my mom came back to the United States and they barely let her fly. That's how big she was with me. And about a month early, I was born in early June, about a month early. I was 10 pounds, 1 ounce. And here I am, so people ask me if I was born in Romania or if I was born in the United States. And I always like that question because I get to tell them, I tell them I'm a hybrid. I was just a little bit ahead of my time. I was made there, but I was delivered here. And so that's the way that it worked out for me. And I found myself in the United States, and that same sentiment that my dad had when he came here, which was, I don't need anybody to do anything for me. I don't need anybody to give me anything. I just want opportunity. That has been true for me, and I've seen it my whole life. And that's where my motto, sacrifice creates opportunity, comes from, is whenever I felt that I was a little bit limited with opportunity, I found out that the antidote, the only thing that would ever give me more opportunity was the willingness to sacrifice a little bit more. Short-term sacrifice creating long-term gain. And so, this is the land of opportunity. It is a country of opportunity. And I was fortunate to find myself with a career that has no ceilings and unlimited opportunity.
Tell me a little bit about your early childhood. I've heard stories you weren't allowed to sweat in the house. Not allowed to sweat in the house. That's like, to me, that's crazy. Like, that's like the next level. Like, this is how Mike was able to grow to be the ultimate super soldier. You know what I mean? Like, we weren't raising regular people. We were raising Terminators in that household. So tell me a little bit about that household, Mike.
So yeah, that was a conversation that, you and I and my brother had. When we were younger, my parents understood that they were establishing a life here in the United States. And there were a lot of things we didn't have, like, especially in the early years. I remember we would go to the doctor, they'd pay out of pocket, if we had prescriptions or something. I mean, there was no health insurance. And so they were very risk averse. And they assumed that if we were ever sweating, we were probably up to something no good or something that can put us in a situation where we could be injured or hurt or whatever. And so they would automatically assume we were being too rambunctious, that we were horsing around. And so they would have us kind of settle down if they ever saw that we were sweating. And so anybody that knows me knows that I probably perspire more than anybody that they've ever met. And so, that was quite a task, and it's one of the reasons why I think I was a little bit like husky when I was a kid, is because my parents, every time I'd start sweating, they were worried that I was doing something wrong. So they'd make me stop.
When I was a kid, I remember I have some core, I call them core memories, right? One of my core memories is my mom telling me I'm never going to be anything in life if I can't get this cursive down. My cursive needs to get down. And I remember hours sitting there and my mom telling no, like, oh my gosh, it's chicken shit. Like, we need to get better. How do we get it better? Like, keep writing. So, and my cursive never got any better, but I imagine you had an incredible cursive. So do you have any core memories like that with your parents where they would work on certain things with you?
Oh yeah. I mean, In Romania, they just approach things so differently than in the United States. And I don't know if it's good or bad, but I think that it automatically ingrains a certain level of discipline in people where, they had something called diabetedar. And in Romania, as a school kid, you don't really learn how to write a letter or, how to do something in cursive. You're constantly practicing the mechanics. So you may practice like 200 ovals because that may be the start of the A. And until you get the oval right, there's no reason to go to the next step and make the A. That way, when you see the A, you're like, well, I know how to do that because I started with something smaller. So it is the repetition of simpler things before you ever introduce more complex things. It is like the Karate Kid, right? Like if it's like wax on, wax off. And in the Karate Kid, he's telling him wax on, wax off, and this kid's trying to learn how to fight. And he's teaching him how to clean windows. You know what I'm saying? So, that created a lot of confusion for the person. But if you trust the master and you know that the master, the person who's mentoring you, has a track record, then you trust the process. And Nadia Comaneci, who was a Romanian gymnast, and she was the first gymnast ever in the history of gymnastics to have a perfect 10 in the Olympics. In fact, when they showed her score, they didn't even have the ability to display a 10. It was one of those old LCD type things, and it just only had one spot for one character, a dot, and then another spot for another character. They never thought anybody could get higher than a 9.9. Well, she got a perfect 10, and they displayed it as a 1.0. And instantly everybody knew that it had to have been the first ever perfect 10. I mean, think about it. The Olympics, they weren't even prepared to give a perfect 10. She went on to have, I think, maybe like a dozen or something like that, perfect 10s in those Olympics. And they asked her, they said, how did you get a perfect 10? And she said, well, I do things that are hard over and over again. And I do them so many times until they're no longer hard. And that, I think, is the foundation of learning anything. And I think that's the way to approach anything that you're going to do. And it's the reason why I don't golf. If I'm going to golf, it's not to go out there and kill time. It's not to go out there and get away from my wife. If I'm going to golf, it's to be the best damn golfer that I can be. Now, if I can't commit myself to that, I would rather just not do it at all.
What was one of the things that your mom, what did she had you drawing the ovals like that? You did 1,000 ovals? Was that like your specific story?
So we did that. We did, my mom was extremely involved as a parent with education. And so I'm so grateful for it. I mean, it was frustrating at times, but what she would do is whenever we would have a test or anything like that, I mean, she would quiz us. I mean, she would just have the textbook open and she would ask questions. And if you got one question wrong, she would hand the textbook back over and she would say, you don't know it, keep studying. And until it was perfect, she didn't stop quizzing us. It didn't matter how long, how many hours, how many times, it had to be perfect. So it was the relentless pursuit of perfection, and anything less than perfect was not good enough. And it's okay to not be good enough in the beginning. It's just not okay to not be good enough at the end. So I wouldn't describe myself as like chubby or fat, but I would describe myself as what Romanians refer to as solid. I was real solid. Okay. I was not a small boy. I was not puny by any means. I don't want to say I had struggles. I think my biggest struggles were really that I was growing up in this household that was trying to hang on to old world values that came from an immigrant country that were so important and such an important part of the fabric of our family and our identity. But at the same time, I was trying to assimilate and acclimate in the United States of America. And when you're a child, you're going through this process of discovery somewhat on your own when you're first generation, because my parents didn't go to school here. My parents didn't have, proms. My parents didn't really have sports in school. You don't really have that. In Romania, especially under a communist country, kids played sports, certainly. You had gym class, certainly. But if you were getting older and you didn't have the prospects of being like a professional soccer player, well, you didn't play soccer. You spent your time where it was going to pay off for you in the long run for your career. And so there were certainly struggles where, maybe I either rebelled or, where I tried to we all want to be part of a community. So I would look at the kind of who are the cool kids, and I would try to go get with the cool kids. And the cool kids weren't always the kids that were like the most focused on their grades. They weren't always the kids that were staying out of trouble. So I had to find a way to kind of be friends with the cool kids, but, not get in trouble and not engage in some of those things. And certainly that created distractions for me. Being around kids like that, a lot of times, created situations where maybe I lowered my own standards, or I started to tell myself, my parents are being unreasonable. And all of those things, they took away from what I was capable of doing and being. And so I learned that, the circle that you keep is so, so, so important. And it's not really just about fun, because fun has consequences. And you can have fun to the extent that it doesn't affect you, or you can have fun to the extent that you're willing to accept the consequences. But fun, like dessert, has its place. And so every struggle I've ever had, I've learned that it didn't happen to me, but it happened for me. And as my mom would tell me, she would say, if I felt that you couldn't do it, like, if I was struggling in class or something, she would say, if I felt that you couldn't do it, then I would be okay with you accepting something lower of yourself. But I know you can, and because you can, you must.
So you graduate high school.
Yep.
I'm guessing what, valedictorian or what, 2
No,
points short of it?
No, I was in the top, 10% of my class, but I was not valedictorian. There were things that, perhaps I could have maybe done differently. I mean, I was the class clown. And that's a very kind of a difficult thing for a lot of people to understand, unless you've met my mom and my dad, is that I got both sides of them. My dad is always, loves to laugh. My dad is always joking around. And I've seen my mom, as she's gotten a little bit older, relax a lot more too. But my mom was really the disciplinarian on a daily basis. And, things had to get really bad for my dad to get involved. He really didn't enjoy that role. But my dad was, I remember just kind of having fun, laughing, goofing off and that kind of thing. So I was like the class clown, but I still got really good grades. And that's kind of weird, because that's usually not the case. So I finish high school and I do very well, but I realized, like in my senior year, that I had created and developed a reputation for myself that I really didn't like, that I wasn't serious, that even because of my behavior, sometimes just kind of being the class clown, that, people, they made assumptions about me that just were really not true. And so I learned that people do read a book and judge a book by its cover. And that's just life. And we have to accept that. We have to understand that. So we have to be aware of the brand that we're portraying and that we're putting off, and the type of person that we are, and how it's being, the way that it's being understood and recognized and perceived by the world.
Did you get a scholarship to Dayton when you going into Dayton, or was it, just, you were looking for schools and there was a school close by? Walk us through school and what was that experience like?
I didn't. Dayton was my third choice. I looked at two schools that were much closer to home, Case Western University and John Carroll. And, Case was probably my number one choice because it was the strongest academically. I mean, I wasn't going to college to make friends. I wasn't going to college for the social experience. I was going to college for one reason and one reason only, and that was to get an education. And so Case, to me, kind of was the obvious choice. It was also the most expensive of the schools. Interestingly enough, it was also the school that gave me the biggest scholarship. Dayton did give me a scholarship, although a smaller scholarship than Case Western. But I absolutely fell in love with the campus. And so it's just another example of the fact that if you look at things as black and white, or if you just look at the data, then I think Case Western is the obvious choice. But we don't fall in love with people's attributes that you can list on a piece of paper. We fall in love with their soul. And so I fell in love with the soul of the University of Dayton. And I am so grateful and thankful that my parents were willing to drive me there to explore that school, because they really didn't want me to be 3.5 hours away from home. And for us to look at it, and that they allowed me to go there because they paid for my tuition. They made tons of sacrifices to do that, because there was still a lot of tuition left over after the scholarships. And so, and I had an absolutely amazing experience at the University of Dayton.
So you graduate Dayton, you're going into law school, right? Bring us through into
I went to
that, into
graduate
your
school.
transition. Oh,
I
you
went
went
to
to graduate
graduate
school?
school right after. Yep.
Okay.
I had an opportunity to be a graduate assistant at the University of Dayton. And so I stayed and I got my master's degree there. And that was well worth it. I did very well in graduate school. I enjoyed it a lot, and I learned a lot because most of my classmates were professionals. So they were people that were working, they were raising families, they were already working in the business world or in the public sector. And so I learned a ton in graduate school, primarily about how to be efficient, primarily about how to identify important cues when you're being taught or you're being mentored, like this is what's important, and a lot about confidence. That was invaluable to me. I mean, I felt like graduate school was so important for me.
Love it. So now transition us into your beginnings into insurance.
Well, yeah, my best friend Nick Zangardi was working with American Income. He had started in 04, and so we both graduated college at the same time. He went to Mount Union. I went to University of Dayton, and I went to graduate school. So I had another year and a half of school. I didn't graduate until December of 2005. Well, he started working and he was doing, really well. Nick was very successful. He was making money. He enjoyed what he was doing. And what surprised me was that he's not really an extrovert. I wouldn't refer to him as shy. It's just he's not really looking to be the life of the party kind of guy or the stereotypical type of person that you think would do great in sales. So, Nick was doing very well, and you could tell because he was the first one of our friends to buy a house. He was the first one of our friends to drive a nice car. And so there were definitely, some examples of his success, and he's pretty tight with his money. He doesn't like to spend his money. So you knew he was doing pretty well. And I just have so much admiration for what Nick's been able to achieve over his 19-year career with great humility. And it wasn't like he was trying to, do something extraordinary. He just wanted to be really great as a human being and where he was at. And I learned a lot of that from him. But Nick was doing very well. And so when I finished graduate school, I tried to jump into law school kind of halfway through. Sometimes you think back at disappointments. There was a class that I needed to take for me to graduate from graduate school as a requirement. And so I had to graduate in December instead of graduating in August, which was what I really wanted to do. And then I wanted to kind of graduate in August of 05 and then go right to law school, but I couldn't. And so what happened was that I had to graduate in December, which meant that I couldn't start law school all the way till August. So I had about a 7-8 month period of time where I needed to work. And so Nick was doing well. I had a little bit of sales experience, but it wasn't serious. It was, I was selling Kirby vacuum cleaners door to door. And when I say it wasn't serious, you can absolutely make a career out of that and do very well with it. It just was not something I was looking to do for the long term. So what he was doing seemed to be a lot better because they provided lead resources and they had a good system. And I knew he was successful there, and they weren't out there knocking doors all day like we were doing at Kirby, because at Kirby you're doing cold canvassing. So I came to American Income, and I just felt like the system was so good and the lead structure was so good. Coming from doing Kirby for a couple summers, oh my gosh, I felt like it was cheating. It was so easy. And so I immediately just knew that something was really, really special there. And that's the way that I started my career. But I have to tell you that I had no intentions of ever making it a career. I really thought that I was going to still go to law school. So to me, I was just trying to get my feet wet in business. My dad's a factory worker. My mom, warehouse worker. And when people say they come from a blue collar environment, my dad can't tie a tie. That's really blue collar. Okay. So I just wanted to get some exposure to business, and I felt like American Income could give me that. And that was what my plan was to do it for about 7 or 8 months and then go to law school.
So year one, what's that like?
Well, after being in the business for about 7 or 8 months, my plan is to go to law school. I mean, I take the LSAT and all that, and I do pretty well with it. And I end up applying to just one law school, which is Marshall College of Law at Cleveland State. And they end up offering me a full scholarship. And so I'm like thinking I'm going to stay with American Income, but then they give me a full scholarship. And when you come from a blue collar household where, Your parents kind of did everything for you, but they can't do anymore. Being able to go to law school for free, that's pretty attractive. So I kind of had this couple days where I really had to make a decision one way or the other. And after a lot of prayer, a lot of contemplation, a lot of conversations, I decided to stay with American Income. And that's really when my career took off. It's interesting that when you have a plan B, you truly don't give plan A everything you could, even though on the surface it may seem so, even though from an outsider's perspective it may seem so. And in many cases, even you may think you are, but you're just not. I really took off after I decided to not go to law school, and everything from there was just like 10x. So, was promoted multiple times. By the end of my first year, I became an MGA. And then 2007 was like a learning year for me. But towards the fourth quarter, I really started to pick up steam. And then by 2008, I was beginning to surface myself in the company and, as an MGA, RGA.
What do you think made you such a natural leader, like a natural born leader of men and women? What do you think, gave you that killer instinct like that?
I don't see leadership as a title. I don't see leadership as necessarily about the rewards. What I saw leadership as was responsibility. And that if you had mastered certain things, then you had to take on more responsibility. That was a requirement in my eyes. And so, what allowed me to do well in leadership was, first of all, is that I see it for the responsibility and not the rewards. The second thing is that I am a honest champion for people. I love to see people win. I love to see people feel good. I love to see people be rewarded. And so it just kind of, that personality naturally lends itself to a leadership role. When you grow up and you go to kindergarten and you don't speak English because your family speaks Romanian, and you know some words, but you can't put a sentence together. When someone accepts you as a friend, even though you're kind of weird, you don't forget that feeling. You don't forget what it's like to be included. You don't forget what it's like to be part of something. And so I, as a leader in the business, I always wanted to give that to people, to help them feel like they're part of something. But I also knew that they had to succeed in the business. Otherwise, they weren't going to stick around, and probably was going to create some friction between me and them because we still had a job to do. So I think just being a champion for people and loving people, and just understanding the responsibility over rewards. Responsibility over rewards. I always tell myself that the rewards come. If you chase the rewards, you're going to find ways to shortcut the responsibility. If you chase the responsibility and being the best that you could be, you get the responsibility and the integrity and the rewards. You get it all.
What do you think were some of the biggest lessons that you learned those first couple years in leadership?
The biggest lessons that I learned in leadership. I think the biggest lessons that I learned in leadership is that in the real world, there are no safety nets. And so you really have to be responsible for everything that happens. And even though something might not be your fault, when you're a leader, it's your responsibility.
I heard that it was no joke being led by Mike Vasu. You really wanted to make sure you pushed your people to be great. One of my favorite stories of all time is when, there was a gentleman that turned his paperwork in a little bit late, and when he turned it in late, you gave him a specific, you challenged him a little bit, right? Will you tell us a little bit about that story, and from your perspective, because from Andre's perspective, it was one of the funniest stories, and it really opened my eyes of what it takes, how you have to hold your team accountable if you want to be truly great.
Again, we go back to administrative excellence, or controlling the controllables, or doing the things right that need to be done right. I'm a stickler for time. I operate my life on timeliness. My dad worked over 40 years. He never was late to work one time in over 40 years. My mom has worked at the same place for 33 years, almost 34 years. Neither one of them in their entire lives have ever been late for work, not one time. In fact, I oftentimes tell the story that in February of 2021, I gave both of my parents COVID. And my mom was really sick. I mean, we were pretty worried about her. I mean, she didn't get out of bed for 18 days. But, when she called in sick to work, they thought she was like pranking them, because that was the first time in 31 years that she called in sick. 31 years. So when people are working with me for 31 days and they can't be on time, or they're with me for whatever, and they're calling in sick and problems and issues, I just think back to my parents who have worked over 80 combined years as adults and have never done that. And I say, well, what's the standard going to be? Is it going to be excuses, or is it going to be excellence? Now, do I know that sometimes things are going to happen? Of course I do. Okay. So we do have to operate with some grace and mercy and understanding. But when it's habitual, it's hard for me to accept it, especially knowing and seeing what I've seen.
The way I heard the story, it was like this.
Oh, you want me to tell you the details of that story? Because I don't remember the details. That story is one example of a consistent type of accountability that I provided my team. So that's one story of 1,000.
Talk to me about some of the success stories and achievements that you had, not only for yourself, but maybe some of the individuals that you were leading through maybe your MGA and RGA years, those early years.
Most of success doesn't feel like success. Most of success is the battle. Success is the day that the reports come out in January and they say that you were number one or number two or number nothing. But most of it is work. Most of it is hard work. And the best years and the most successful years were the years where we worked the hardest. They were the years where we battled the most, the years where we endured the most stress, the years where we made the most sacrifice, the years where we put in the most time. And so when you think back, it all feels really, really good. And it all feels like it was mostly winning. But the truth was, and the truth is, that most of it doesn't feel very good at all. So either you've got to, endure the process in order to be able to achieve the result, or you can love the process and then you got to live with the results. And in my life, what I found out is that people who, are motivated by pleasing processes get bad results. And people who are motivated by pleasing results are willing to put up and endure a difficult process.
Michael, no matter what you would have done, you were going to be a champion. That's for sure. With that, when we're talking about insurance and we're talking about kind of really working as hard as possible, what was some of the, the different sacrifices you had to make? What was your, work family life like at those times in the early careers, your, first couple of years as a maybe MGA or an RGA?
Are you asking about like my work life balance?
Yeah. Like what was your work life balance like?
So I think this is a concept that is foreign in a lot of countries. It's something that exists in the United States of America where people talk about work-life balance. They bring this problem of how do they manage their schedule to work. And it's not work's responsibility to manage your personal life. I think it's your responsibility. I've never, ever thought about it. I knew that I wanted to achieve really great things in my life. I knew my life was short. I knew that if I wanted to have a family, I had to be a provider. And I had to decide what kind of a provider I wanted to be. So I've never, ever thought about it. I don't know how many hours a week I work. I try to work as few hours as I possibly can to get the job done.
You were very successful, like, RGA, which, for those that aren't in the, Globe Life structure, is basically like a regional director, right? Like he was running a large territory, right? So, you were a very successful one in the biggest, organization at the time for, I don't know, probably like, you were competing, with some of the top regional directors for like, I don't know, was it like 5-10 years probably, right? With that, what do you think like was some at the top level of being on and that level of like kind of being almost like a second hand to someone that's the main character in the deal, that's really running the deal, to be the right hand man? What were some of the lessons you learned there?
So my number one mentor in the business is Marcus Smith, and he's the best leader that I've ever personally worked with. He's brilliant. I mean, he's a genius, and he really understands efficiency. He understands prioritization. He understands energy. He understands bringing passion to the work that you do. And so when you work with a top level leader, they're running hard. They're not out there trying to like shake hands and kiss babies. I mean, that's just not what he did. We were about work. We were about getting the work done, and we were about moving on to the next thing. They asked Tom Brady, they said, which championship was your favorite? And he said the next one. And that was really Marcus's approach. And that was our approach at the business. I never even thought about money. I was thinking about how can we win? How can we win championships? How can we dominate? How can we put it out of reach? And when you compete at a high level, you have a lot of people that are very talented, very gifted, very capable, who are very successful. If you start looking at them, you're going to get very distracted from where you're gifted. If Shaquille O'Neal wanted to be a point guard, we'd have no idea who he is. But instead, he decided to be one of the most dominant big men in the game of basketball. And therefore, he goes down in history as one of the greats. Why? Because he's 7'2" and was over 330 pounds. So if you can try to stop him, good luck. But if it was about dribbling a basketball and shooting, then he wouldn't have done very well. And so just trying to play the game based upon where you're gifted and where you're talented, not expecting people around you to necessarily have the same skill set, but to be willing to do the same with theirs. Being able to handle pressure, being able to handle small, insignificant things. Like some people would get really upset with Marcus about certain things that he said. I didn't care. I wasn't listening to his words. I was listening to his heart. And that really, really helped me. And in fact, we had about an hour conversation this morning. So even though it's been years later that I haven't even been in his organization, I still consider him to be my number one mentor.
So tell us a little bit about your transition from, top RGA. Now you get a phone call.
What ends up happening is that I think the natural progression is that eventually at some point in time, maybe you want to become a state general agent. And that certainly was a goal of mine at some point. But my trust in Marcus was so great that every time that an opportunity to become a state general agent had kind of come my way, I would just kind of run it by him. And I would say, what do you think? And if he said no, then it was no. And so the opportunity to go to Houston came up. And initially I said no. And the reason was because a couple years prior, I had gone through a divorce. And so I had a daughter in Ohio. Abby was my first child, my oldest daughter. And I was a committed father. And I had learned that from Marcus as well, about being a committed father. And so to me, that was like the number one thing, that everything in my life had to work around my daughter. So I told the company at first no, that I wasn't going to do it. And then I had a school function for Abby, and my ex-wife Megan was there. And I had mentioned to her, I said, oh, you'll never guess. I said, Steve Greer is going to be the new CEO of American Income. And we had been together my first few years in the business, so she knew everybody. And she's like, no way, that's great. She said, do you have a chance to go to Houston? And I said to her, I said, yeah, they called me about it, but I told them no, because of course, Abby and stuff like that. And she said, Mike, if you want to do it, I'll support you. And, we'll figure it out with Abby. It's going to be okay. You're going to figure it out, and you can visit her and all that. And I think you should really explore it if you want to, if that's something that's in your heart. And I thought to myself, wow, that was a pretty good endorsement, right? From someone that, would have every reason to not want me to pursue my goals in a lot of ways. But we've always gotten along, and we understood that we were going to raise this daughter for a lot of years. And so, so I said, maybe I'll call the company and I'll reconsider. So I did. And I talked to Roger, and who was the CEO at the time. And we kind of had a little bit of a conversation about it. And I decided to accept it and to move to Houston. And so that was a really big deal for me. And I was really nervous about it. I didn't do it. I mean, I was so happy in Ohio. It's where I was born and raised. I was successful by everybody's measure. And I was part of an amazing organization. I had great leadership, great friends, and it was difficult, but I just felt led to come to Houston. And that's the truth. I mean, it just sounds so hokey, but it's just the truth. I felt like the only reason that I would have said no was comfort. Meanwhile, for over a decade, I'm preaching to people, you've got to be uncomfortable to be successful. And so if my only reason for not pursuing it was comfort, then I would have to either accept the fact that I was being a fraud and lacked integrity, or I had to get my ass up and move. And so I decided to get uncomfortable. I decided to move my life across the country, 1,200 miles to Houston, Texas. And here I am, and became a state general agent. January 1st of 2016 was the start of my SGA career.
Absolutely fire, brother. Thank you so much for sharing that. I think just this introduction of your early life to your early career added so much value, because you guys don't want to mix let me rephrase that. You guys don't want to miss the next episode where we hop into Mike's successful career as an SGA estate director, where he moves down to Houston and starts up his own agency down there. So a lot of big things. And then we'll segue into some different stuff, like we'll get into some of his family life, some of his beautiful growing family, what that's like being a successful business owner and juggling that. And then we'll hop into some spirituality and some other different things as well. So looking forward to that as well. Mike, where can some of our audience go check you out? Obviously, what do you have going on right now besides just, the family, tell us, plug us in with some of your links.
Well, I mean, you can find us on, find me on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, anyway, I mean, there are any of the major social media channels. Of course, Pete, you and All Caps Media take care of us with that. A lot of them, I'm not even really too sure what's out there, but we send you content and you produce it and you put it out there. And so, we've trusted you to do that for many, many, many years. So, we're nowadays, it's pretty hard to hide. I mean, people can find you. And so we're really happy to be building a brand online, and we're looking forward to continuing to do so in the future in an even bigger way.
Awesome, guys. Make sure to check out MikeVasuOrganization.com. Michael Vasu on any social media platform. True genius. Wouldn't be where I am today without him. Looking forward to part 2 here soon. Thanks for coming to Insurance Icons. We'll see you guys next episode. God bless.